count this in. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's going now. Excellent. So thanks again for joining me today.
Yeah.
I suppose I'd like to start with a round of introductions. Maybe could you share a little bit about your current role or job title and what that means?
Ooh, and what it means. That's the harder one. So my name's David Wiley. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Lumen Learning. And what that means is I lead our research work. I lead our data science work. I also do a lot of kind of visioning for our work, where we're going in the future. And then on the side, I'm also adjunct faculty at a couple of universities. Maybe most significantly, I'm the director of the student startup incubator in the College of Business at Marshall University, where I teach entrepreneurship. So a little bit about the hats that I wear and kind of what they mean.
All right. I suppose we might even try switching hats to see even different perspectives for the rest of conversation. And since we're talking about AI and education, what's your connection with either of these fields?
Well, I mean, my connection with education is that my PhD is in education. I was a full-time faculty member for 11 years, a postdoc for 1 year, and I continue to be an adjunct. I've been an adjunct now for 12 years, and actually prior to that for 2 years also. So 1 year as a postdoc, 12 years as full-time college faculty, and 14 years in some kind of part-time or adjunct role. And the classes I've taught have been primarily in education, more recently in entrepreneurship. But even just this year, taught a graduate course on AI for instructional designers. So this is an area that's near and dear to my heart.
All right, sounds good. And just on that line, when we're talking about AI for instructional design or AI in general, what does AI, artificial intelligence, mean to you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I should say that that course was focused very specifically on generative AI. There's lots of AI that's not generative AI, and I honestly don't play a lot in those areas. So the kind of AI that I'm interested in is AI that can help with help. Oh, I don't know that I've ever had to articulate this, so you've given me a bit of a poser here. How would I describe AI? I don't know. Let's come back to it. Let me noodle on that, and you come back to me in a couple of minutes, and I'll have a reasonable answer for you.
Yeah, sure thing. It's just it's going to be useful for grounding what we're really talking about if we have a shared understanding of it. But we can come back to it in a bit. I do have
Well,
another big
that's why I'm
question for
worried
you.
if I give you an off the cuff answer and then we ground the rest of our conversation in it, it might take us a place which isn't really where we want to go. So let's just take a minute here and come up with an answer then.
Sure.
What is AI? Let's go with this. I'm going to say that at its heart, AI is, at least the kind of AI that I'm interested in, is partly a process by which machines are able to learn from examples, extract structure from examples, maybe something like meaning from those examples, and then use what they've learned in order to make predictions in the future.
Mm-hmm. And maybe to check, I suppose, if we imagine a weather forecasting station, which observes weather patterns every day and then makes a prediction for the next few hours or days, would you call that an AI system?
Yeah. I mean, everything from a simple linear regression like y equals mx plus b. If you give me a bunch of data points, maybe the amount of time students spend studying and the marks that they receive on some exam, if I can learn the pattern there, then if you tell me the next student's amount of time spent studying, I can predict how they will do on the exam. And I would think of that as falling into, something just as simple as fitting a line to a scatter plot. To my mind, kind of fits that the low end of the range of things that I'm thinking about. So yeah, a weather station would be another great example. You use data and algorithms to learn patterns and make predictions. Yeah.
So really, the core of it is using data and examples to make predictions for, I guess, unseen examples for the future.
Yeah, learning patterns, learning structures, and using those to be able to predict. Yeah.
Cool. And then I have another big question for you. Putting AI aside, what does open education mean to you?
Ooh. Well, let's take them apart. So I would say education is the well, let me go back one step further. It's clear that people are able to learn many things without being involved in formal education. Newton supposedly sat under an apple tree for years, right, and learned something about physics. I think the purpose of education is to speed up that process. So you can learn things on your own, but you could learn them much more quickly if you have someone guiding you, leading you, supporting you, giving you feedback. And that could be a live person, or it could be a person from 100 years ago who wrote a book, that you're reading. But I think education is about making learning not nearly as frustrating as it would be otherwise. Education is still super frustrating, but I think you get my sense of what I'm thinking about education. And then to me, open is basically a synonym for sharing. It's about, I'm obviously a big fan of the 5 R's framework. So in one sense, it's about giving people permission to just go and do whatever it is that they need to do in order to best meet their own needs and their own circumstances in their own, in their own life. I think sharing, and the other thing I would say is openness is about humility. It's the humility of knowing that I don't know all the things that everyone in the world needs out of the resource I might create or the thing that I might be about to do. And if I give them permission to do whatever it is that they need to do or want to do, in some ways that's me admitting that I couldn't foresee all of that and plan for it and design and optimize for it. And having the humility to know that you can't know all those things and you can't do all those things, I think means that, I think that leads you to sharing and leads you to openness. So for me, openness is really about doing what you can do to kind of open opportunities for others. Give them whatever permissions you might happen to be in control of, or whatever obstacles might be kind of within your reach to take down, taking those down, sharing what you can, letting people do what they want to do, need to do, because you'll never be able to anticipate all of that.
Interesting. So there's quite a few themes of what openness could be. You mentioned humility, you mentioned sharing, you mentioned, I guess, removing barriers and enabling access. Do you see a common thread that is the core of openness between these different aspects?
Yeah, it's sharing.
Mm.
I would say sharing is the core, and then all those other things are kind of elaborations of what sharing really means in practice.
Right. So, for example, humility, I guess, is honestly sharing experiences. Um, as
or or,
for,
or realizing why you're sharing. Right?
mm, mhm,
Like, what is it that motivates you to share?
right. And removing barriers then is sharing more effectively.
Well, removing barriers is another one of the reasons you might share. I mean, there are many reasons you might share, right? Um, and it's not that some of them are more right than others. But for me, the two primary reasons you would share are because you don't understand what other people need and want. And so you can share so that they can do the things that they need to do and want to do. Um, and then, what? I've already lost the thread. What was the other thing we said? Sharing and, oh, sorry, humility and
So, humility and removing barriers or enabling
yeah,
access.
removing barriers. So I think in many ways, without recognizing it, we participate. We are the cause of barriers for some people doing the things that they want to be able to do. And with a lot of times with a simple choice, we can change that.
Hmm. Mhm. Interesting. And I suppose you might have foreseen where this is going. We talked about AI, and we're now taking this to be systems that learn from examples and can make predictions. And we talked about open education, where the open aspect is about sharing. So, what happens when we put the two together and talk about open AI in education? How would you define openness in that context?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a if once you set out those lines of AI and education and open, I think it's pretty easy to connect that dot up to what open AI is. I think if AI is um, a system that can make predictions, then it's about sharing that system and its constituent parts with others so that they're able to do the things that they need to do and want to do, including, making changes, making adaptations, or we might say revising and remixing so that those systems work better in their local context. Um, I you referenced the talk from a couple of weeks ago, but I've been doing a fair amount of speaking and writing and thinking about this. And like to my mind, the key things are prompts, training data for fine tuning purposes, as well as weights. I think if we share those and give each other permission to do the things we need to do and do the things we want to do with those, that for me personally, that can be openness. That can be where open education and AI intersect.
Hmm. Okay. And can you think of any examples of AI technologies that you would call open AI? Does such a thing exist?
Oh yeah, yeah, very many, very many.
Hmm.
There are lots of examples of in education of collections of prompts that people have put together that are designed for educational purposes, where they've either explicitly said that those prompts are in the public domain or they've licensed them under an open license. There are plenty of examples of models whose weights have been released under like truly open licenses or licenses that are so open that the difference between whether they're truly open or not is kind of academic and I don't find interesting, those differences. Um, I don't think there's a lot yet of, and I'm still researching this, but I don't know that there's a lot of training data that have been designed specifically to fine tune models to make them more educationally effective that has been openly licensed. But I think there's more of that coming in the future.
Hmm. So really, when we're talking about AI, I'm noticing you mentioned different constituent parts of a system, and each one could be open. And so if we're talking about prompts, they could be open. Talking about weights, they could be open, and that's separate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And is openness a binary thing? Would we say that something is either open or not?
No, 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 no. Certainly not. Like even among the Creative Commons licenses, which are the most popular framework for openly licensing things, there's absolutely a range of how open those things are. You know, if I'm not allowed to make any derivatives and not allowed to make any commercial uses of a work, it's not very open. You could argue that, well, I'm allowed to make copies and give them away, so that's sort of open. That's great. But yeah, I think open is absolutely a sliding scale.
Right. So things are more open or less open. And I guess you mentioned the 5R framework. So I suppose would it be then by the number of R's that it allows people to do, or how would you interpret points on the scale?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. In my thinking, um, although I wouldn't want to try to force this thinking onto others, but in my thinking, if all those 5 R's aren't present, it's not open enough for me to want to spend my time on. If I can't revise it and remix it, um, well, if I can't make my own copy, I can't do anything. If I can't revise and remix my own copy, then I can't use that to meet my needs with my students or on my project or whatever it is I'm doing. And even if I can revise and remix, if I'm not allowed to redistribute that thing that I've changed, if I'm not allowed to share it with others or use it publicly, then there is no purpose in me revising and remixing it in the first place. So for my purposes, if all 5 R's weren't there, it someone else might want to say that if it's licensed by NC, that it's kind of open, and that's fine. They're welcome to say that, but it's not something that I would invest any of my time in as far as project work or something else would go.
Hmm. I see. And it's interesting as we're thinking about different constituents, how each of these points would apply to them. I can see how it applies to prompts. They're the classical form of text. But when we're talking about weights, for example, and it's a whole load of numbers, what does it mean to revise and remix them?
Well, it would mean doing things like fine tuning them so that you're you're changing the values of those numbers in some parts of the matrices. It could be model distillation, where you take a really big, very high parameter model, extract training data from that model, use it to fine tune a smaller model, and in that process transfer some of what the bigger model knows or is capable of into that smaller model. That would be revising and remixing that smaller model. Quantizing would be another example of revising, where in models, those numbers that are stored in the matrices are sometimes 16 digits long or longer. And if you have billions of those parameters and they're each 16 digits long, then that makes if you just think about it as a big file, it makes the file very large. But if you quantize those values so that instead of being 16 digits long, now they're only 8 digits long, you've cut the size of the file in half, you've cut in half the amount of memory it takes to be able to load and run the model. You start to make it so that people can actually download the model and run it on their own local laptop, if it's an open weights model. And so I think there's a whole range of things, from fine tuning to distillation to quantization to other things that are what it means to revise and remix when it comes to model weights.
Right. And inevitably, as we're talking about AI systems as systems that are trained on data sets with previous examples, what role does data play in this? I suppose, does it matter?
You mean the content that's used as the training, the pre-training data? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, what I'm getting at, I suppose, is does that influence how open or not an AI model is, or does that a completely separate
Uh,
matter?
um, well, so there's still some legal decisions to be made about this. I, for one, am a strong believer that training an AI model is a fair use. And so the copyright status of the training content doesn't matter. because at least in the US framework, if something's a fair use, that means it happens outside the framework of copyright. That use is not governed by copyright. And so whether something was fully copyrighted or CC licensed with an NC requirement or CC licensed with an attribution requirement or training models, if it's true that training is a fair use, then all that happens outside the framework of copyright and it's kind of irrelevant. And if in the US there's a 4-part test for determining whether something's a fair use or not, I look at those 4 and to me it seems very clear that at the end of the day, training models will be determined to be a fair use. Now, if that turns out to not be true, then it creates a whole bunch of complexity that we'll have to deal with. But I don't think that's the way it's going to go.
Right. And I suppose then in a very similar line, if we're, say, going for model distillation, you could make an open model on the base of a larger closed model.
Yeah. As long as now there are some terms of use, like with OpenAI's models, according to their terms of use, you're not allowed to use them to generate data to train other models. So you want to pay attention to those kinds of things. But if you had I don't actually know about Claude's terms of use. Maybe Claude doesn't prohibit you from generating data with it in order to train other models. And so in that case, you'd be okay.
All right. Interesting. And going from here, I suppose, now that we have a somewhat clear idea of what OpenAI in education is, what future opportunities do you see for OpenAI in education? And I'm specifically focusing on the open part.
I think there's one group of opportunities that focus around open prompts and another around open training data for fine tuning and open weights. And I think those are 2 different sets of possibilities because they require different skill sets for people to be able to engage with them. So pretty much anybody can take an open prompt out of a prompt library, copy it, paste it into a model, hit enter, and use that. That seems, prompts feel very much, they feel like something that anybody could use and even revise or remix. It takes a little more skill and expertise to generate a set of fine-tuning data or to apply a set of fine-tuning data to some open weights in order to revise and remix those. That feels like it's the more powerful of the 2 opportunities. But a lot of times, especially when it comes to technology, the more powerful opportunities do require you to have a little more skill to be able to engage directly with them.
I guess that's quite interesting then, when thinking back about removing barriers being an aspect of openness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that you're making starts to get into some adjacent ideas which are related, but I would think of as being very different because if at some point in the future, if I had pre-trained a model and I had those model weights, and I could choose to openly license them or not. If I openly license them, I've done everything I can to remove barriers for you to be able to do things with it. Whether you have the skill to do that or not, that's not a barrier that I have any control over, right? So when I open that up, then I've done what I can do to make it possible for anyone else to do what they want to do. But I don't feel like in order for something to be open, the licensor or the sharer has a responsibility to then go teach every person who might want to make use of that thing all the things they need to know in order to make use of it. There are some obstacles that are local to you and some that I have control over. And all that I can control is what I can control. So I can share.
So that's really interesting because I'm thinking about something like releasing software, which maybe isn't obvious how to use. Usually it will come with a manual or some documentation.
Yeah.
Do you think such a manual or documentation has been required for a system or a released thing to be open?
No, no, no. I think it certainly makes it, it increases the chance that someone will be able to use it for sure. But I think there's lots of software out there that's openly licensed that's even very well documented that 99% of people in the world still couldn't figure out what to do with it. But that it's not the responsibility of the software author or the documentation writer to go and somehow find all those people and train them and upskill them.
I see. So openness really is just about how something is being shared, not so much in the eye of a beholder.
Yeah, I would say so. I think so. I think openness, kind of practicing openness, is about trying to do what you can do to remove obstacles for other people, and that will be a, that will be a sliding, that'll be a continuum as well. Maybe I could quit my job, and then just start going around the world training everyone to try to upskill them to be able to do all the things that could be done with things that I have shared. I mean, and would that is that something I could do that would remove additional obstacles? I suppose it is. So I guess you might think about there being a continuum of kind of the obstacle removal part of that.
I see.
But I don't think it's reasonable to expect anyone to do that, though, even though that might be what the ultimate in sharing and obstacle removing looks like.
So if we put, I guess, sharing on a spectrum, there is at some point a point when we can say something's open, and you can go beyond that. But at that point, it's already open.
Yeah, I would say so.
All right. I'm mindful of the time. I know already half an hour has passed. Do you have to run?
No, I don't have anything until the top of the hour.
Okay, thanks. Because I do have a few more questions I wanted to discuss. I wanted to ask you about what challenges have you encountered or do you foresee in implementing open AI in education?
Well, legal uncertainty is definitely a challenge. There's nothing that normal people can do about that. We're either waiting on the courts or we're waiting on governments to act. And the idea that our governments will act in any timely fashion just seems like a fantasy. What obstacles? Will you ask the question one more time?
Thinking about the challenges in implementing OpenAI in education.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be very much like, I think it will be a lot like open source software. So take WordPress as an example. WordPress is pretty popular with people in the open education space. It's totally open source. Anyone can run it themselves to host their own collection of open textbooks or whatever they want to do. But even though it's open source and even though anybody could host it on their own, 90% of people still pay a small fee to a hosting provider to have someone else take care of that for them. And that's a choice that they make, right? They could choose to take all the open things and download them and have their own server and run it there, or they could choose, to get some help with that. I think you'll see something exactly the same in the way that generative AI will roll out, at least on the fine-tuning and the open weights side of things. The prompts will be created and shared a lot like traditional OER. They'll be used differently than traditional OER, but anybody can open Google Doc and start typing in words. That will be a prompt. The same way that anyone can open a Google Doc and start writing chapter 1 of their chemistry textbook. So I think some of the same challenges from before actually, I think all of the challenges from before come forward. But I don't know that are there novel challenges? challenges we'll have now that we've never had kind of in our work with OER in the past? I don't think so. I reserve the right to change my mind on that answer, but right off the bat,
Fair enough.
so yeah.
Yeah, as somebody else has said, we should probably ask people again in 3 months' time what they think about OpenAI. It might be different. But I'm hoping as we really talk about what really makes something open at the core, that shouldn't change much over time.
Yeah, I would. That's not going to change for me.
And what risks do you associate with the use of OpenAI in education? Suppose we do manage to overcome all the challenges and we're going for benefits. Do you think there's a way that we can get it wrong?
Oh, of course there are ways to get it wrong. You can always do things wrong. What are some ways that we could get it wrong? There is some recent research that suggests that the ways that learners interact with generative AI while they're learning, that there are some types of use that are associated with better learning and longer memory and kind of more durable acquisition of skills, and other ways of using generative AI that actually result in less learning, lower exam scores, things like that. Of course, that's not unique. That'll be true whether you're talking about iPads in education or printed books in education or using the internet in education. Like if we don't use tools according to what educational research tells us is going to be effective, then we're either going to not help learning or we might actually hurt learning. So I think there is some exploring that needs to be done to figure out, you know, for kinds of uses of AI that are either in education that are either novel or in some way feel novel. I think there's a little exploring to be done to see which side of that divide they're going to fall on. But generative AI is a technology, and there's a lot we can say generally about technology in education. Like how you use it is what is going to be the predictor of, you know, whether students will succeed or not. So I think it has the same risks. At a high level, it's the same risks that there are with every other technology that you might try to bring into the educational experience.
Yeah, it can really depend on context, and this could be a very big question. I'm interested in this part. If we narrow down to open AI as opposed to closed AI, do you think there's any unique risks to the use of open AI specifically
In education,
in education?
yeah. Open AI as opposed to closed AI. Well, I suppose someone could either through incompetence or malice, you know, do a very poor job of fine tuning an open model in a way that would make it kind of consistently and reliably hurt student learning, even when teachers and students tried to use it correctly. What other, I mean, the difference between open AI and proprietary AI is your ability to make changes to it. So the risks are going to be associated with the changes that you would make. Another difference would be that there will always be some form of that open model that you can run locally on your own machine, disconnected from the internet, so that you can run, you know, in low bandwidth areas or things like that. What risks might be associated with local use as opposed to cloud use? It's not obvious to me what that risk would be. Yeah, so I'm not being very imaginative here.
It's interesting. And yeah, it's certainly not easy to think about because I guess many of these examples remain to be seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for your thoughts. And do you think openness in AI in education is something we should strive for.
Oh yeah, yes, and
Right.
because of that humility, right? We should know that no matter how I train this model or what I do with it, how I might fine tune it, it's not going to meet the needs of all the people who could potentially benefit from it. So by making it open, we empower them to change it in whatever ways they need to change it so that it can work for their needs. And if we don't do that, then the only kind of capability that anyone is able to use is what we, as the high and mighty designers, have decided they should have. And like, no, we need to be open because we don't understand all the things that people want to do or need to do, and we need to enable them to do the things they want to do and need to do.
Mm-hmm. That gives a good overview for the why. And
Yeah.
then to get there, what steps do you think are necessary to promote openness in AI in education?
Mm. Well, actually, so you must be aware, there are a couple of movements, we shouldn't say movements, a couple of initiatives or projects going on right now that are trying to define what open AI is. So the open source initiative is running one that's been discussed a lot. And in my opinion, they're making it far more complicated than it needs to be because they're trying to take all the components of an AI system and identify what all of them are, and then talk about how, as a group, they collectively are or aren't open. And that seems to me to just be a terrible decision because each of those components is either software, content, or data, and we have decades of practice and understanding of how to openly license software, how to openly license content, and how to openly license data. And if you just treat each of the pieces independently, we actually already know how to do this and have been doing it for many, many years. The complexity of trying to combine it all into some new Frankenstein that we want to talk about collectively is very confusing to me.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose that is one of the challenges to, I guess, come to a conceptual model which makes sense for everybody. And one can imagine AI systems as open as a whole, but then it's putting together many different things, or just each bit is open or separately.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if we go with on the path of considering every separate part of an AI system that could be open, do you think there's anything that I suppose different stakeholders should be doing to promote openness of them?
Yeah, I think they should look at the last 20 to 30 years of practice and learning and history and understanding and mistakes that have been made and think really hard about how that applies to them and what they're doing because it seems like AI is this new thing that is never been seen before, but the software is software, the content is content, the data are data. Um, we ignore history at our peril. Um, and I think this whole conversation has been made a lot more complicated than it needs to be because, I don't know, I guess because people like to do, people like to do new things. So, hey, there's AI. What if we tried to decide, you know, if I have this combination of content and these combination of data and this combination of software and I have all that together and it's all these different parts, what if we tried to say whether the whole thing was open or not? Okay. I just I don't understand the value because at the end of the day, you're not going to use the whole thing. You're going to take it apart and use the parts that you want to use. If you want to use the model, you're not going to use all the pre-training data is worthless to you if you just want to use the model. If you want to use the pre-training data, I think you understand what I'm trying to say. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
That makes sense. And I suppose there are many values or many reasons we discussed to go for openness. Um, it really seems like it's on the creators, the people making, say, AI models or training AI models to release them openly.
Mm.
And the incentives are in part for creators in that their models might be more used for purposes they haven't foreseen and by a wider range of people. But most of the benefits are for the users.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think are motivations, I suppose, or reasons for people releasing AI systems to make them open?
Yeah, I think that goes back to, have you ever read an essay called The Cathedral and the Bazaar
I have actually.
from the late 90s? I think that's it. I think the reasons that you make things open are still many of the reasons that are outlined in that essay. You do it for the sake of transparency, and not just transparency because transparency is an independent good of its own, but transparency leads to higher quality. It leads to things working better, being more effective. It's just, the difference between the free software movement and the open source software movement, in my mind, is that the free software movement is really about principles, exclusively about principles. Whereas the open source software movement is much more pragmatic. And my experience with people on the free software side has been that they will say software should be free because it should. And it's an ethical argument. And if you don't make your software open, or if you don't make your software free, it's because you are unethical, because software should be free. Whereas the open source argument is that when we open things, there are a number of practical benefits that accrue to everybody, most of the time. But sometimes there aren't. And in those times, you wouldn't release it openly because there's no benefit to the users or to you of you doing so. But it has this very practical kind of feel that's focused on benefits to people as opposed to being about these kinds of principles that inexorably lead you to think of people as being unethical if they don't participate in your movement. So I obviously fall on the open source side of that. And I would think the reasons that you would open source, getting back to your question, I think the reasons that you would open source AI are those same kinds of reasons. The benefits that it would accrue to users, the benefits that would accrue to you as the creator, the new benefits that could never exist otherwise, that only emerge through the kind of collaborative process that generally does not, but can happen in the context of either open content or open source or open data. There's a lot of goodness that can happen to people in the world when you use that model. And Eric does a good job of identifying many of them in the Cathedral and the Bazaar. I think that's it.
And just to clarify a little bit about one part, I know that in the free software movement, they refer to free as in freedom, but made me think of cost. And in open source software, it doesn't necessarily need to be free. You can sell open source projects. And I was curious, what's your view on cost with AI? If you have, say, open model weights, do they have to be available to people free of cost? What's your view on this?
Yeah, well, we should also say that Richard has been super clear that free software can also be sold. There's nothing about free software that means it has to be free as in beer. It only has to be free as in freedom, right? And he's consistently, for decades, been clear about that. No, so to me, does something that's open have to be free of cost? No, absolutely not. If everyone has permission to make their own copies and to redistribute those copies, it puts a kind of market dynamic ceiling on how much you could ever charge for something that's open, because someone else will always be able to get it for free. But you have to be adding some kind of value, right? So back in the day, back in the 90s, when I first started using Linux, there's this amazing company called Cheap Bytes. And all that Cheap Bytes did was they sold open source Linux distributions on CDs. When you had a 28K modem and it took 17 hours to download a Linux distribution over your phone line, well, what if you could just pay $10 and get the whole thing mailed to you on CD? It was all open, but it was significantly more convenient just to have a copy of it on a disk, and I was happy to pay for it, and paid for it many times when new distributions came out, right? So the idea that for something to be open, it has to be free in every case, I think is just fundamentally wrong. There will always be free versions of it, right? Because anyone has permission. Like I could have bought that Cheap Byte CD and then taken the software off of it and posted it on my website and say, anyone download it here for free. But Slackware was already had it on their website downloadable for free. It was already available for free in lots of places. Would I have paid $100 for that CD? No. But there is some dynamic there between greater convenience, greater ease of use, whatever that value to me is, I'm willing to pay for it. And if I'm not willing to pay for it, I can always go to somebody's freely available version that's there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that helps to clarify things about the boundaries of what is required for openness as well.
Yeah,
So
for
that's the
me,
last of my questions, really.
cost does not enter into the equation, but except in one way. The one way that cost enters in is that the permissions that are given to you, normally by means of an open license, those permissions should be granted to you for free. You shouldn't have to pay for those permissions. If you want to pay for permissions, you can just go do normal copyright world, right? You can pay a licensing fee and do whatever. The grant of permissions that you get should be perpetual, and it should be free. And other than that, cost never enters into the definition of open again, as far as I'm concerned.
Hmm. I see. All right. So thank you very much for sharing your insights today. As we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add or discuss regarding the use and future of OpenAI in education that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I mean, for many, many years, I've been fond of saying that openness facilitates the unexpected. When you put things out there and give people permission to do anything they want to do, they're always going to do things that you never anticipated. And a lot of those things are going to be just so delightful and surprising and joy creating. It's incredible. People do things that I would think of as stupid or wrong-headed as well, but I'm not them. They know what they need, and they know what they want, and so they go and do that. But I think just the range of things that can be done with generative AI is so much greater than the range of things that can be done with traditional OER, like a PDF or a website. That this idea that openness facilitates the unexpected has dramatically larger implications in open AI for education than it did just in kind of open education the way we've known it in the past.
So we have lots to look forward to see what people do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about empowering people.
Sounds good. And that's a high note, I suppose, to end the recording on. So I'll stop it here.
Very good.